We got Joe Weisenthal from Bloomberg calling in.
Hi.
Hey, Joe, how you doing?
It's our financial brother.
I'm thrilled to be here with my technology brothers. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad to have you on the show.
Look, is this
the
guy
step and
professional?
repeat's fantastic. He's such a
professional or
professional.
something.
I'm not used to this. You know what? The last time I did any sort of like video call-in show, my producer Kale, who was in the room with me, he scolded me because he's like, "You look like garbage in that video that you did." Because I just went down to like the basement here at Bloomberg and I like propped up my phone and it was a weird angle. So he said, "Next time you do anything, just let me know." And so he got me set up. Shout out to Kale in this really nice studio here.
It
and
looks
I have like
great.
a proper ring light and everything in front of me.
So
fantastic.
can we give the viewers a little background on you? As I understand it, your passion is for finance podcasting, but you have to make ends meet by playing in some sort of band. Is that right?
That's right. You know, you can't really live on finance podcasting alone. And so I'm in a country music band called Light Sweet Crude.
Yep.
And we pass a bucket of tips around after each show.
Yep.
And I think the last show, I probably, after netting it out with the opening act and the other members, I think I got about $10.
Fantastic.
Amazing.
So that was the key
Hit the
to
size
sort
gong,
of
John.
making ends meet.
Boom.
Boom.
There we go.
Yeah, there you
got
go.
the gong. It's fantastic. Thanks for joining. I did
Anytime.
Odd Lots a couple months ago. It was a great show. We had a bunch of stuff we wanted to talk about today. Did you see this SEC news that VCs will be they should be able to advertise their active fundraisings? This was in Axios today.
Oh, did this? I missed that today, but I'm sure this will be wonderful. Many retail investors convinced that they're getting in on the next big thing. This can only mean good things. I'm sure that's more wired checks to you guys.
Well, I think the idea is that if you can put $100,000 into a fund, or if you can put $1 million into a fund, it sort of implies that you're accredited, right?
I mean, it could be less risky than some SPACs, I guess. Like, you get into some diversified fund that's professionally managed. Doesn't seem that crazy.
I love that. Well, there are riskier things that are conceivable. So therefore, I get it. Hey, look, you can advertise literally anything else, right?
Okay.
So
I want to know, you got to break the news here.
Yeah.
You posted yesterday, I have a good idea for something I want to write in the newsletter tomorrow. I'm so tempted to just waste it as a pithy tweet right now. You put it in your newsletter.
Yeah.
We're going to encourage people to go subscribe, but can you break us down? What was that good idea?
I hated that Solana ad. And I know everyone hated it, and I hate just like, if someone follows me on Twitter, I don't usually like jump on the thing that everyone's jumping on. That's not really like my style, but I hated that ad. It had nothing to do with it being like anti-woke or whatever. It was just like, I hated the premise that like investing in crypto, that like investing in meme coins, which is the primary use of Solana, is somewhere along the land, like
space travel,
should be in the same conversations. Like, we built
nuclear.
the railroads, we landed on the moon, and we trade coins on Solana. It's like, no, I'm sorry. I don't accept that premise. It's not part of it. And I was going to make, like there's this, the joke when I could have just done it in a tweet.
Sure.
Which is the real set. Which is, it's like, what would your job be on the, the Soviet commune? And everyone imagines that they're the poet. It's like, what would your job be on the, the Martian landscape? And probably your job's going to be miserable because it's miserable up on Mars and it's cold and there's no climate. You're probably doing something with like trying to mine ice or something like that. But everyone imagines that they're the guy who's going to be like, oh, I'm going to like set up the decentralized payment platform to like finance. Like everyone imagines that that's what they're
the
gonna
Martian
be that guy.
meme coin artist.
Yeah, it's like I'm going to be the guy posting dank memes to like motivate the workers who are out on the Martian landscape. I hated that ad. I hate the whole premise. It could have been a tweet, but because I am employed, because I need to make ends meet here at Bloomberg, I was like, you know what? I'm going to write it up in slightly longer than 280 characters for my newsletter today.
Yeah, I mean, to steel man the Solana on Mars, we're going to need to fractionalize that ice, get it on chain, trade it. Like this is going to be important, I think.
Like who has the one token? You got to tokenize the ice. I get that.
Exactly.
So maybe all right. Well, then I'm slightly open-minded to it.
We've got a working theory. Yeah. We want Doge to let us privatize the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum and put the planes on chain. We want planes on chains.
Yeah.
So that's our political platform. I'm curious what you think the whole play was with Mark and the Tesla video yesterday. Do you have any sort of comments on that? It felt weirdly sort of conflicted in the sense that Luminar was.
I don't know I'm sorry. I'm so online and I'm embarrassed. I missed. Who is Mark?
Mark Rober.
I totally missed it.
Yeah. Anyway,
Okay.
Mark Rober put out a video testing the Tesla self-driving, which is camera-based, against the LiDAR system from a rival company.
We're gonna switch this interview. We're gonna pretend like we're interviewing a country music superstar.
Yeah, just ask me about country music. You asked me about like Tesla. I don't know anything about that stuff.
Well, what about your recent interview with Andrew Ferguson on the FTC antitrust thing? I like that. I thought, my takeaway from it was that he is very eloquent and a great storyteller. He did a really good job of kind of going back multiple decades, talking about Trump 1 and Lena Khan and stuff, and like kind of just taking me on a tour of what's going on. But and also it was very interesting that he kept coming back to like worker harm as well. That was kind of an interesting talking point. But first, like what was your read coming out of that in terms of like how things might change?
Sure. It's so interesting because obviously everybody remembers there was the huge market rally immediately after Trump won. And one of the narratives was that, the FTC under Lena Khan had taken this really strict line on mergers, and mergers weren't getting done. And so it's like, okay, we're going to finally get this green light on merger wave. I think there's two things here. So one is like when markets are down and risk is off, obviously, that's a main driving force for declining mergers, right? Mm-hmm. When people are uncertain, et cetera. So that's one factor why we haven't seen this big merger wave happen. It's just because actually market volatility came fairly quickly as soon as the new administration hit for various tariffs and reasons, and we could talk about that or maybe the general economy even prior to tariffs. But, I think that like this expectation that the new administration was going to be sort of this, like, at least on the regulatory side or at least on the deal side, the sort of like libertarian green light everything is not really panned out. And so it's interesting. We did a live show down in D.C. just last week, and it was a lot of fun. And we had the new FTC chair, Andrew Ferguson. And it's interesting because he's keeping Lena Khan's merger guidelines in place. Mm-hmm. He does have philosophical disagreements, as he puts it, and he did this like fantastic history of like what the consumer welfare standard was. It was actually funny because so early in the interview, there was a point, I forget exactly what the question was, but something about Trump and the rule of law, et cetera, and the whole audience like started laughing.
They started booing,
and you could hear it. It's in the audio.
Well, no.
And I was like, all right.
Your producer like turned down the volume on that, so I just heard like a gap, and I thought they might be booing him, and he's like, no, I get it. It's a DC audience.
It was laughing. It got a little hostile. It got a little hostile.
It was kind of crazy.
It was like I was like, oh boy, like this is getting off the rails. It didn't go off the rails. And then to your point, in the next question, he sort of walked through the history of the consumer welfare standard as it's been understood by like theorists and conservative jurisprudence over the years, and he did a very good job at that. And actually the same crowd that had laughed at him before gave him a round of applause for that part. So they did the sort of like history of some of this stuff is really interesting. But to your question itself, like I think his point was there is more to consumer welfare than just lower prices. Mm-hmm. We don't need to expand you don't have to expand beyond consumer welfare. We just have to sort of have an expansive definition of the term. And so, as he puts it, if there are issues that are going to slow down innovation because something is anti-competitive, regardless of the price, that could be a harm to consumer welfare. He did talk about the idea of harming workers as a harm to consumer welfare. So I think, like, I don't know yet. Like, it's really hard to say because the next time, if we get a sustained market rally at some point, we might see a bunch of deals get announced. Mm-hmm. Until there's a bunch of deals announced and they actually have to go through and green light or red light them, I don't think we really know how tough this new cop on the beat is. But, he's made this point in now public and private. He's like, we take this idea of corporate power as a harm very seriously. And if you think this is going to be sort of like a Bush-era FTC, you're mistaken, which I think is really interesting and probably relevant for investors both in private and public markets.
Yeah, it's interesting. In terms of consumer harm, it almost feels like people are they're not saying consumer harm, but people are frustrated with the pace of AI innovation at Apple, and just the fact that Apple can kind of just sit there, and Siri is free. They're not raising the price, but it feels like it's underperforming relative to if it was true.
Well, what do you think? I'm actually
market.
Curious your take on that. Like, why do you think that is? Because Apple must feel some angst about that, or maybe they don't, because no one is going to switch to the green.
I think they feel angst after John Gruber's article last week because they got really taken to task. But
anyone, it seems. But this is what I don't get. Like, I get the impression it's not that hard to build a pretty high quality LLM because everyone seems to be able to do it. So what is it just about, like turning it into a Siri quality product?
You just need $7 million.
So I think it comes down to, Apple wants they have this insane standard for every interaction has to be perfect. Right. You look at what's going on Apple TV, and they're having trouble getting through the like awkward stage of what Netflix did, where there was a lot of just like background laundry TV on Netflix, just reruns of sitcoms and stuff. And Apple, everything needs to be polished almost like award level, and so they've gotten close, but they're kind of trying to play HBO's game. And I think with the AI summaries, they could easily just vend in an LLM, but then they're going to get hallucinations. Those screenshots are going to go out on X, and people are going to say, "Look at what Apple did; it's crazy."
But this is why, to me, it makes me wonder whether, so much of this conversation has centered around the Apple question. Why can't Apple get this right?
Yep.
And I keep wondering, it's like maybe this is an AI thing, which is that like all of us and I use LLMs every day for sometimes work, but sometimes just out of curiosity. I'm simultaneously every day blown away, and I'm also every day like, oh, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen, and the idea that this is approaching human intelligence is a joke.
Yep.
And so the fact that like it can't be productized to like a real for a company that really is like takes the consumer experience very seriously as Apple does, like I wonder if that's like a this is
but here's an angle. It seems like LLMs are good at delivering sort of human intelligence, which is not always reliable, right? Sometimes you're working with somebody that's smart and they give you some work and you're like, this sucks, do it again. And so people are used to that dynamic. Whereas with a machine, if you click on, Chrome and it opens Spotify, you're like, what are you doing? You know? And so like that kind of
we
seems
expect
like
our systems to be deterministic.
It's possible to be blown away by an LLM when you're using it as a co-pilot to write stuff, but then if you're using it to order an Uber, it just does, it's not going to do it, right?
Yeah. I mean,
I had a great hallucination the other day. I was using Perplexity to prepare for an interview. I was like, and I find them useful. Anyway, we were interviewing some of the founders of dimensional funds, and I said, what are some interesting aspects of dimensional lore that would be just sort of interesting to bring up? And it said, ask them about their famous low volatility coffee that they serve at their headquarters, where they claim to have like developed the perfect mix of caffeine and taste.
Okay.
Does not exist.
It doesn't exist.
And so I'm thinking like, I'm a responsible journalist. I'm not going to just like ask a question that an LLM, but somewhere, someday, some reporter you're going to see on TV is going to ask an insane question with an insane premise, and it's because someone along the lines gave them a list of questions generated from AI.
Yeah.
And I'm just waiting for that moment because God, if I had just asked that question, what's the deal with your low volatility coffee?
And they're just like, what are you talking
like professional
about?
humiliation.
Yeah. I mean,
it's like an offhand joke that the CEO made at one point.
No, I could find zero. Also, the clue was it said they serve it at their Santa Monica headquarters. They're headquartered in Austin, so I knew there was something off about it from the beginning. But anyway.
Yeah.
So going back a little bit to M&A, we're purely technology focused. We were covering the Wiz acquisition today, which is obviously good for the private markets. It's good for everyone from the big asset managers that got a nice 2x in less than a year. It's good for broadly, SaaS broadly. You're less focused on that type of M&A and more focused on stuff like the sort of Capital One and Discover. Like, is that the M&A market that really, if Capital One and Discover can happen, does that mean that M&A is really back on the menu?
It's a really good. That's a really good question. And actually, one of the things regret we only had so much time with Ferguson is we actually so much of it was talked about tech and tech power and concentration of tech power because everyone on the right and the left is in some degree anxious about that. In retrospect, had we had more time, I wish we had actually spent more time on non-tech things because that matters too. It just doesn't get as much attention, or people don't think about power to the same degree in some of these areas. But I do think that's interesting, and if you look at that spread. My colleagues, I think, flagged it yesterday. If you look at that spread on that deal, that's been a complete round trip since the election. So if you want to see one chart that sort of encapsulates the sort of changing moods since the euphoria in mid-November, mid-December, et cetera, and then the sort of turnaround essentially when Trump took office, which was basically the turn. I think the crypto high was literally the day he had that ball
that makes sense.
The Trump meme coin.
The Trump
I think
top followed by the Trump dump.
Top, which is perfect. I mean, it's so perfect because, of course, it was.
You want to start
but
strong.
I think if you look at that spread chart for Capital One and Discover, you kind of just see the whole the rethinking of, how sort of markets friendly this administration is going to be.
On economic data, I love following you on days that are the jobs numbers and stuff.
Love jobs day.
But I want to get kind of a high level for someone who's maybe in tech and not as embedded in finance. What is the Super Bowl of finance? What are the important days to watch for? Because I know that there's data dripping out. There's preliminary CPI data. Then there's Fed funds data and stuff. What is the one day that you can't miss, or what's kind of noise that you can kind of write off?
Yeah. Well, I'll say the Super Bowl is always going to be jobs day because it's a really good, high quality survey. If you want to understand, are businesses in a mood to invest?
Yep.
And are they feeling good? I mean, there's no better measure than are they actually willing to hire someone and take on new payrolls. So I think just sort of if you want to understand the business climate, that has got to be the gold standard. And there's so much to chew on, and there's so many ways to slice it. There's so many ways to analyze it.
Yep.
There's a lot there. It's I guess the first Friday of every month typically. Yep. That's good. The other things that I think are really worth watching right now, several of the regional feds have a monthly survey of the manufacturers in their district, and I think you really want to be watching specific questions about. How are you feeling about investment right now? Capital expansion plans, capital expenditure plans. To me, that is the sort of $1 billion question right here, which is there's this hope, right, that we're going to have this reindustrialization or further industrialization, or that's kind of what the administration is banking on.
Yep.
The sentiment right now is that there's too much chaos to make any big choices, and no one really knows what the final tariff arrangements are going to be, et cetera. But I would say in terms of the sort of second tier data beyond the jobs report, I'm really interested in those sort of business surveys that sort of ask a bunch of different questions about what's happening with your costs, what's happening with your various business planning as they see it out the next 6 months.
Are you looking at any kind of alternative data sources? We were talking to somebody who was looking at Trueflation data instead of kind of CPI, or are you a purist? You got to go straight to the source.
No, I love
all of it.
All of it. There's no. The truth of the matter is that the government data is very good quality by and large. There are a bunch of other surveys. It's I remember during COVID, looking at those measures of dining out, et cetera. Sure. And when is that coming back? Or airplane sales, which were actually, that's another sort of yellow flag or red flag for the market. Some of the airlines, I think Delta last week or 2 weeks ago, they said they're already starting to see ticket sales tail off. It could be because there were a lot of
crashes,
travel incidents in the news. Yeah. So it's not totally clear. Look, there's no data I won't look at. But I think right now the question is the sentiment data, the business sentiment data, the consumer sentiment data going to translate into hard numbers? And I don't know if the answer is yes or no, to be honest, because we had pretty terrible sentiment data the last several years. You think back to 2022 when inflation peaked, terrible sentiment numbers. Consumers kept shopping and dining out. So for all they told surveyors that things were so bad, they were still active as consumers.
The Kyla Scanlon vibe session.
Yeah, I mean, it really did seem to be a disconnect between how awful everyone was saying things were and what they were doing, which was going on cruises and record numbers and all kinds of things like that.
Yeah. Question for you. People have joked about there used to be, we had bull markets and bear markets, and now it seems like we have kangaroo markets. Which is just like, going up and down like this. It's just sort of a fun analogy.
I hadn't heard that one before.
I graduated college in 2018. We had very quickly it was COVID, and then the COVID crash, and then ZERP, and then
interest rate hikes,
and then everything's it's been this sort of kangaroo dynamic. Is a kangaroo market just a obvious byproduct of the internet, where just information is just traveling so quickly, where sentiment can change so quickly, and trade on I joked historically, like, now we have group chats where friends are just, from all over the world, sometimes are just like talking about what's happening and trading against that information and trading against the sentiment in the group chat, right? And historically it would be like, oh yeah, you go to your college reunion and you're hanging out with your buddies that, maybe you got some guy, and everybody's like, oh yeah, it's actually, we should be really bearish. And then you sort of make these sort of long-term decisions.
Yeah, it's funny, like, because I am a journalist in financial markets, people think I know something. They're like, oh, is now a good time to refinance my house? And I was like, I have no idea. If I knew which way mortgage rates were going, I'd be maybe in a different business. But I do, typically get a few texts when the market's down. And people are like, hey, Joe, how you been? It's been a long time. What do you think about the market? And that's often like, okay, maybe we're getting close to a bottom here. So just for what it's worth, I haven't gotten any. Old friends have reached out in the last several weeks. So if you want to use that as an indicator of something, maybe that means we have more to go down. But I think, look, like, markets are volatile because the world is volatile. I mean, there's a war going on. There are multiple wars that the U.S. is in some way connected to.
Yeah, but isn't the argument that we directly we feel like we're experiencing that volatility because we're seeing it live? We're seeing the war in Ukraine. We're seeing something happen in Syria or Libya, or you can sort of like
during the war on terror, like, it was pretty smooth sailing until like a massive crash that lasted years, and then a massive build up for years, and now it does feel more volatile. It's a bull market in the VIX.
I think that's real. I mean, I think that, like, in terms of like the emotional vandalism that everyone experiences every day because they're just scrolling, how can it not be having an effect on things?
Totally.
Do you see a world in the are SPACs doomed because they have such a bad reputation right now, or could they be great? Could SPACs be great?
You know what? SPACs have come and gone multiple times in their history.
That's
so
true.
I would never bet against the return of the SPAC. It might take a while. I think it's like maybe even like every 15 or 20 years or whatever. But I am confident that in my lifetime there will be another SPAC boom. I will make that prediction. Whether it's in a year or 5 years or 10 years. But like, I believe that this idea of like, you're going to put money into a box and something magical is going to happen, that will never stop being tantalizing to investors. I think the SPACs are not dead.
Capital finds a way, like sand through pebbles. It just needs to find its way. I want to talk to you about you post on X, but you also post on Blue Sky. And I see some posts do really well on X. Some of them do on Blue Sky. Are you using other platforms?
I mostly use X.
Yeah.
When like the market's down, I post on Blue Sky because that crowd is like sickos for bad news under the Trump administration.
Does seem like that.
So I'm like, I'll throw them some chum about like how the NASDAQ is down 2%. I love Twitter. I'm so addicted to it. I'll stay on. It's like Donald Trump and Diet Coke. Like I'll keep like.
But are you using any of the other platforms? Are you on Threads?
No. Well,
I went on Blue Sky. I think you're the only person that I follow.
I don't use TikTok.
Okay.
I don't use Threads. I don't use TikTok. My Instagram is private. But we have a Discord. And the Odd Lots Discord, 10,000 members.
Wow.
It's like so I'm in there a lot.
That's
great.
Really cool.
People are like posting book recommendations.
Sure.
Stuff like that.
Like much higher signal, I imagine. Much less noisy.
Yeah. And like, so it's mostly X, a little bit of, and then my Discord. And
that's great.
It's fun.
That's awesome. What about prediction markets? Yeah. Can you just give me like how you're experiencing them?
Sure.
Pros and cons,
I love them.
Values.
This is like my co-host and I, Tracy. We have different perspectives on this, which is good. But look, the way I see prediction markets is like threefold, which is like, I think it's good to have a price on the news in many cases because people make a prediction. They'll be like, oh, I think AI is going to eliminate all white-collar labor within 2 years. I would like to see some price on that. I would like to see people put their money where their mouth is rather than just that big said with retweets. I think it's a good way of knowing what people are interested in at any given moment. And the other thing I'll say, and I've said this before, which is that the U.S. Treasury market is literally a prediction market because U.S. Treasuries at any point in the curve are the ensemble prediction of what the Fed is expected to do over the course of any given time. So a 5-year Treasury is what the next 5 years of Fed short-term rates are going to be. You could decompose it. And the Fed makes its decision on whatever it is, 12 voting members. And so the Treasury market is literally a prediction market on what 12 people at the Fed are going to do 8 times a year over any given term. So the idea that it's not like a prediction market. It is a prediction market. Yeah. And so they're clearly validated as one of the core pillars of the financial system. So hopefully, I don't know, I'd be into it if they have more liquidity and people can have more specialized bets on things. I think it'd be a cool thing.
Yeah, it does seem like they need to figure out how to do longer dated prediction markets.
Yeah, right, because you don't want to tie your money up forever on some 2032 contract.
Exactly. I was talking about the last election was so exciting. I was like, I'm ready to start betting on the next election.
But it's like you don't want to make a bet that it's like your money.
Exactly, and they're just like, that's not a product that anyone wants. It's it's very funny, but.
So I got to run, fellas.
Yeah,
I got to run to a recording, but
awesome.
I'd love to come back.
Yeah,
I'd love
you
to
got to
come back with the Technology Brothers sometime.
Be honest.
You so much
you have
for
to go
having
get on the Ted Cruz podcast. I know you were.
And I would love to go on the Ted Cruz podcast one day too. It's between you guys. It's between you guys and him.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for stopping by.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
Thanks for coming on. Have a good one.
We'll talk to you soon.